My name is Sissel Halmøy. I'm founder and chair of the International EMF Alliance. I'm also Secretary General for the Citizens Radiation Protection in Norway. From what we have heard today, all signs are pointing to the need for more protective exposure guidelines across the globe. People are developing neurological conditions, cognitive problems, mood changes, inflammatory conditions, learning disabilities, cancers, and acute and debilitating electrosensitivity symptoms. Human lives are at stake, and especially our children are at risk. Last year, we hosted the gathering in Norway of leading international EMF scientists to discuss exactly what new biologically based health-protecting exposure guidelines would look like to protect public health as well as the environment. Today, Olle Johannson will share with you the consensus reached among the scientists. In short, all agreed that new biologically based exposure guidelines, taking into account long-term as well as non-thermal exposures, are urgently needed to protect public health worldwide. And governments should take actions now. Please join me in welcoming Professor Olle Johannson from Sweden's Karolinska Institutet, who will summarize the new guidance for global governments regarding exposure to electromagnetic radiation.
Thank you so much. Actually, I think you have already said it all, but at the same time, I've been surprised today to see that many of you uses mobile phones in the breaks. You also call numbers that are to mobile phones, thus endorsing worldwide exposure of human beings. I think Libby summarized it very clearly. You have to make up your mind. You have to decide what you want, each one of you, and work along these lines. Even if you are a public representative, you must have a conscience, moral, and ethics, and follow your heart. I will shorten my presentation because we are short of time, so I will skip a few of the slides which you have already seen, but I will introduce the idea of biologically based human exposure standards. The scientific paper is in press and will arrive shortly, and please read it because it contains a large number of very important bullet points, and we have put an enormous number of hours into it. So please read it and realize it's just one further step along a long road, and maybe the final answer will be that we will have to introduce safety measures rather than public exposure guidelines. And such a safety measure, you can all imagine what that would be. I will then skip a few of the slides here and just remember you that I ended my talk before the breaks today that the European Parliament voted 522 to 16 to recommend much tighter safety standards for cell phones. Rumors tells me that actually the industry came to the European Parliament and said, this is a very good idea, but we, the industry, should do this revision, not independent scientists or whatever they call us. And we thought that, maybe at least we could come up with an alternative expression and idea. And therefore, thanks to Sissel and others in Norway, we were able to meet in Seletun, outside of Bergen in Norway, in November last year. And a group have decided together to put their names below this new publication. And I will not go through all the bullet points because we don't have time for it, but I will just point you to a few of them. To begin with, as you already know, low-intensity non-thermal bioeffects and adverse health effects are demonstrated at levels significantly below existing standards. The public safety limits, like the IEEE and FCC here in the United States, are inadequate and obsolete with respect to prolonged low-intensity exposures. New biologically based public exposure standards are urgently needed to protect public health worldwide, and it's not in the public interest to wait. Sensitive populations, for example, the elderly, the ill, the genetically and immunologically challenged, and children and fetuses may be additionally vulnerable to health risks. Their exposures are largely involuntary, and they are less protected by existing public safety standards. We urge governments to adopt an explicit statement that the standard for judging and acting on the scientific evidence shall be based on prudent public health planning principles rather than scientific certainty of effect, because the consequence of doing nothing in the short term may cause irreparable public health harm. The panel in our paper, which will appear soon in an American public health journal, discourages use of more lenient public safety standards for workers as compared to the general public. Separate safety limits are not ethically acceptable. Workers include women of childbearing age and men who wish to retain their fertility. Well, it's actually nothing to laugh about, because this is very serious, you know, and I'm finding it very strange that public authorities all over the world has accepted the use of more lenient public safety standards for workers for decades, including all kinds of environmental toxins and occupational exposures. I cannot really understand that. But we also strongly recommend that persons with electrohypersensitivity shall be classified as functionally impaired, as in Sweden, rather than with idiopathic environmental disease or similar indistinct categories. This terminology will encourage governments to make adjustments in the living environment to better address social and well-being needs of this subpopulation of highly sensitive members of society. Just quickly, this is actually just summarizing the United Nations Convention regarding the human rights for people with functional impairments. So it's nothing particularly new about it. The scientific panel from Seletun in Norway recommends an international registry be established to track incidence and mortality for e.g. cancers, neurological diseases, and for the effects of electromagnetic fields on children and sensitive electrohypersensitive populations. And this is a high priority. And this should, of course, be in an open access format. Anyone should be able to follow, read, and think about this information. There is a need for mandatory pre-market assessments of emissions and risks before deployment of new wireless technologies. There should be convincing evidence that products do not cause health harm before marketing. Such decisions may have to be quickly revised given new evidence. I also have to remind you that we are actually talking about toys. These are not life necessities, and therefore it's important to take action. And of course, as a mental fire brigade soldier, I'm very, very happy if it turns out that this is a false alarm, but that would also mean that thousands and thousands of publications for decades at the same time all will have to be wrong, and that has never, ever happened in science before. Do not believe for a second that mobile phones and wireless internet, smart meters and so on are safe, because they are not. They interfere with normal brain function, learning and memory, fertility, cancer risks, and have been shown to share the DNA in cells. All of this can be found in peer-reviewed scientific journals, but until now has not been in the public domain. You can find it, you can read it, you can assess the data yourself. Governments and health protection agencies usually hide behind out-of-date official guidelines that were drawn up when it was thought that the only way that living organisms could be harmed by electromagnetic radiation was if it was sufficiently strong to cause significant acute heating. And this is monitored in fluid-filled plastic dolls. Not even Swedes are fluid-filled plastic dolls, I could tell you. They are living organisms, and therefore these guidelines, as was pointed out at the Radiation Research Trust meeting in London at the Royal Society. They cannot be used at all, and were never meant to be used as any form of safety measure. Paolo Vecchio was very determined from ICNIRP to point this out. Unfortunately, the day after, at another meeting at the Institute of Physics, he had completely forgotten about this, which was odd. It is high time to face facts. Governments and parliaments must open their eyes to the reality. Thank you.